Romance books are easy reads. They don't make you think. They're brain candy. You don't need to engage emotionally. You just keep turning pages until the two characters kiss. Whoever it is out there that says that, I would like to have a word with you. There is this whole cultural assumption that books read by women are somehow lesser than serious books that serious readers read. And I will give you a very easy answer as to why. Misogyny. That's right, it all boils down to misogyny. Women can't enjoy something made for us. Women can't enjoy sex. Women just can't enjoy anything. God forbid women enjoy something that doesn't center the male gaze. I know what you're thinking, but Britt, I'm not a misogynist. I hate to break it to you. You might be. The thing is, misogyny has been so ingrained in all of us for so many decades over time that almost everybody experiences internalized misogyny or outward misogyny. Romance novels are pieces of literature that women have been secretly loving for years. Fabio holding a barely clothed woman on the cover, where the MMC takes her in the middle of the forest, has been the fantasy of unloved housewives for decades. Now we love these books out loud. People unapologetically read it at the airport, in the doctor's office, or waiting in line to pick up their kids from school. They have become the most talked about TV adaptations over the last few years. But here's the thing, there are plenty of books that center sex in some way. If you come across an explicit scene in literary fiction, it's brave, poignant, and juicy. But when you have it in a romance novel, suddenly it's just smut or corn, calling it that with total disregard of the actual story. Today I'm going to be walking through 4 arguments that prove romance is not easy reading. It's some of the hardest emotional work that a book could ask you for. We'll discuss books that come with content warnings because of how deep they go, books that help you become a little more cultured, and books that make you think. Let's start with my personal favorite author. She has made me sob more than any Pulitzer Prize winner ever could. If you haven't met yet, I'd like to introduce you to Abby Jimenez. She deliberately put something dark in every single one of her books. Infertility, grief, mental health issues. This isn't accidental. She's using the framework of romance to give people permission to feel things and process things that they are too afraid to do so outside of fiction. And better yet, she does the research. She doesn't just write what she thinks it looks like, feels like, or how it might manifest in real life. She interviews professionals and the people who've been through it. She does the work. She knows what she's doing. And quite frankly, she has made me feel more seen than I think any author possibly could. This is Just for the Summer. This is the first romance book that I ever read that made me have to put it down and process some things. This is the book that solidified her as my favorite author. We have our FMC Emma, who struggles with something called CPTSD. If you have never heard of CPTSD before, that makes sense because it's not even diagnosable in the United States because it's not in the DSM-5, though it is recognized worldwide. It stands for complex post-traumatic stress disorder. It comes from chronic, repeated trauma instead of one singular event. And the way Abby Jimenez writes Emma tells the better story than any clinical book ever could. This is a disorder that I too have to deal with. When I read Just for the Summer, I saw myself in Emma, even though our traumas are different. I knew before I made the acknowledgments that she had to have done extensive research or deals with it herself, because the way she describes dissociation is something that I have always had trouble putting into words myself. That feeling of your body having to do the things that it needs to do in order to survive, but your brain is somewhere completely different. To know what it's like to be so afraid of being hurt again that you actively push people away and tell them that they need to find someone better than you in their life. To rather be alone than to ever possibly hurt someone the way that you have been hurt in the past. To fully understand what a flashback feels like. To have your brain screaming for help even though you're no longer in any danger. Abby Jimenez perfectly captures what this disorder looks like, feels like, and how it affects the people around you. I guarantee that you'd be able to find yourself in one of her books because of how personal she makes them. And if you'd ever like me to rank my favorite to least favorite Abby Jimenez book, let me know. I'd love to do that in shorts. If you think that's the hardest that a book is going to hit you today, back up, because Emma is not the only one with CPTSD. This is where we're going to need to talk about The Deal by Elle Kennedy again. We've been talking about this book a lot lately, and we're not done yet. Because this book asks you to sit inside someone else's trauma and not just witness it, and actually understand it. The Deal follows two college students who don't particularly like each other, but have one crucial thing in common. They both have traumatic pasts that shape the way that they live their life today. I won't spoil anything about The Deal, but this book had me so engaged as I read it. Watching two broken people not only find love, but find their much needed healing in each other. The best part is the show doesn't shy away from it either. The adaptation puts their traumas front and center in the show, letting you sit with them as they process their trauma, letting you sit with them while they process it and fall in love. The Deal is a masterclass in the genre's secret superpower, the only genre that guarantees healing. And healing is hard to read. Happy endings aren't cheap. They're earned on the page, each and every one. And you get to feel every step along the way. Now I want to talk about a very specific type of emotional labor: forgiveness. Because Emily Henry wrote a whole book that asks you to sit in the idea of having been cheated on and cheer for joy anyway. In Funny Story, you have these two people who are barely friends, but their partners are childhood best friends. Well, one day, those best friends realize they're in love with one another, leaving our two main characters jilted and heartbroken. They become roommates, and through that learn how to laugh again, and more importantly, fall in love. Emily Henry is one of the few romance authors being taken seriously in mainstream literary circles. Funny Story got reviewed by outlets that normally disregard the romance section entirely. The genre is finally starting to be taken seriously. It's just we all got here first. And here's the argument that I don't think gets talked about nearly enough. Romance isn't just emotionally educational, it's also culturally educational. Let's start with Dating Dr. Dill by Nisha Sharma. This Shakespeare retelling, along with the rest of the series, is filled with Indian culture because our main characters all fall within that culture. You get to immerse yourself in the culture and understand it just a little bit better. I learned new terms and foods that I had never heard of before. By the end of the book, my biggest takeaway was that I had a cultural experience that I had never had before. Nisha Sharma is Indian herself, which brings us to the concept of own voices. And if you've never heard of it before, it's a literary term that describes an author who shares the same underrepresented or marginalized identity as the protagonist. It was coined in 2015 by Corine Divis, who is a disabled bisexual author from the Netherlands. I implore you to read books by authors who write own voices literature, whether they be queer books like Casey McQuiston's One Last Stop, or disabled authors like the aforementioned Corine Divis, or my friend Melissa C., who wrote two incredible YA romance novels about living with a disability, or books written by people of color about people of color like Dating Dr. Dill by Nisha Sharma or Only for the Weak by Natasha Bishop. I also write own voices for mid and plus size women with my two books, Deep Water and Price Check on Love. For the record, these also come with pretty heavy topics, so take care of yourself before reading them. Reading romance from marginalized perspectives makes you a more empathetic and culturally aware human. That's not brainless. That was the entire purpose literature was designed for. Even if you dress it in a love story, the impact doesn't change. And look, if we're going to talk about the smut part specifically, every single intimate scene in a well-written romance does one of three things. It's building trust between the characters, it's revealing vulnerability, or it's changing the power dynamic. It can also do a mixture of the three. If you're reading it just for the spicy part, then you're missing the whole point. And I say that with love. Romance can be fun. It can be titillating, and it can be for escapism, but it can also force you to do some pretty heavy lifting. Serious literature like Dante's Inferno might make you rethink morality, but so can a romance novel, even if it's about a woman falling in love with her literal stalker. As an author, I have found the reason for that is because writing is like journaling. It's just journaling for public consumption. When I sit down to write, I pull from my own experience. Sometimes I pull from experiences that people have shared with me, but a lot of times it's my experience, just written through the eyes of my characters. And what I don't understand, I research. But I can tell you as an author who writes it and reads it, it is emotional labor, because we're reading about two people doing the most vulnerable thing they can do, falling in love. So no, romance books are not necessarily easy reads. They ask you to sit with trauma. They ask you to practice forgiveness. They also help you learn about another person's culture or understand your own mental health. And yeah, sometimes they ask you to think about intimacy in a way that builds trust instead of just performing it. If a romance book has ever made you feel more seen than any serious literature ever could, I want to know about it. Let me know in the comments. And if you're tired of defending your bookshelf, then hit subscribe because we do that every Thursday. Which just leads me to, I'll see you next Thursday. Bye.